In the summer of 2009, Jerome J. Carter stood at the pinnacle of his career. At 35 years old, he was not only a successful rapper but one of the most influential figures in the entertainment industry. His albums consistently topped the charts, and his presence commanded respect from all corners of the celebrity world. He lived in a sprawling mansion on the outskirts of Atlanta, an estate so large it resembled a small palace. High gates surrounded the property, and security was tight, ensuring only the most exclusive guests entered its grounds. Jerome's life was a whirlwind of excess. His wealth was flaunted at every opportunity: luxury cars in the driveway, designer clothes, and the most expensive jewelry that glistened under the flashing lights of the paparazzi. But it wasn't just his music that gave him power. It was the control he had over those around him. Jerome's reputation extended far beyond his public persona as a rapper. Behind closed doors, he was known for throwing legendary parties, invite-only events that gathered the elite of America's entertainment, political, and sports worlds. His mansion became a hub for the wealthy and powerful, a place where deals were made, secrets were shared, and boundaries were pushed. These gatherings were not your average parties. Jerome had strict rules. All guests were required to wear white suits, a dress code that gave the events a surreal, almost cult-like feel. In contrast, his staff, dressed in black, moved with precise professionalism, serving drinks, preparing lavish meals, and catering to the needs of the high-profile attendees. The parties exuded luxury, but there was always something unnerving about them, a darkness lurking beneath the surface. Among the celebrities, athletes, and politicians, whispers circulated about the true nature of Jerome's events. Rumors had started to spread that what happened at his mansion went beyond drinking, music, and networking. Guests were treated like royalty on the surface, but once behind closed doors, the party's darker side came to life. Jerome was known to take advantage of his guests' trust. Some had seen young men and women disappear into the more secluded areas of the mansion, only to return looking disoriented and confused. One person who witnessed these horrors firsthand was Jerome's wife, Shanice. A pop singer in her own right, Shanice had her own fame and fortune. To the world, she was a glamorous figure, adored by millions of fans. But at home, she lived in quiet terror. Jerome, while charming and loving in public, was a different man behind the gates of their mansion. He controlled every aspect of her life, from her career decisions to her personal interactions. Shanice's life was a carefully curated facade, one where her true feelings were hidden beneath layers of fear and isolation. Shanice had long been aware of Jerome's disturbing behavior at his parties. She knew he often drugged his young, unsuspecting guests, slipping something into their drinks to make them pliable and compliant. Once they were subdued, Jerome would take them to one of the hidden rooms in the mansion, rooms equipped with cameras to record what happened behind closed doors. The footage was never shared publicly, but Jerome kept it as leverage, a way to control and manipulate those he had trapped in his web. Despite her fear, Shanice never had the courage to confront him. She knew what Jerome was capable of. His power extended beyond the music industry. He had friends in high places, people who owed him favors, people who could protect him if anyone tried to challenge his authority. Shanice felt trapped, suffocated by the fear that if she ever spoke out, her own life could be destroyed. Everything changed the night Ryan attended one of Jerome's infamous parties. Ryan was a 15-year-old internet sensation, a young singer whose wholesome image had made him a beloved figure on social media. He was innocent, a stark contrast to the jaded celebrities who usually populated Jerome's events. Ryan's team had received the invitation and, excited by the prospect of mingling with powerful figures, allowed him to attend. When Ryan arrived at Jerome's mansion, he was starstruck. The opulence of the estate, the gleaming lights, and the presence of so many celebrities overwhelmed him. Dressed in a crisp white suit, he wandered through the party, meeting people he had only ever seen on television. Jerome, noticing the young singer's wide-eyed innocence, zeroed in on him. He made sure Ryan felt welcome, introducing him to key figures and offering him drinks throughout the evening. What Ryan didn't know was that one of those drinks had been spiked. As the night wore on, Ryan began to feel unusually tired. His movements became sluggish, his mind foggy. Jerome, with his practiced charm, offered to help the boy find a quiet place to rest. Leading Ryan through a series of hallways, Jerome brought him to one of the hidden rooms deep within the mansion. What awaited Ryan inside was unimaginable. Jerome's guests, older, powerful men, were waiting. Shanice, watching from the sidelines as usual, heard unsettling rumors about what had happened that night. She felt sick with fear, knowing she was powerless to intervene. The morning after the party, Shanice confronted Jerome in a rare moment of bravery. She had reached her breaking point. Her voice trembled as she demanded that he stop these horrors, or she would go to the police. For the first time in years, she threatened to expose the dark side of his glamorous world. But Jerome, calm and manipulative as ever, brushed off her threats. He assured her that it was all a mistake, that what had happened to Ryan was a one-time incident and would never happen again. He promised to change, to stop the disturbing events at his parties. Shanice, though skeptical, wanted desperately to believe him. She had been living in fear for so long, constantly walking on eggshells, that part of her clung to the hope that Jerome might actually mean it this time. But deep down, she knew the truth. Jerome was not a man who could be controlled. His power, influence, and depravity were far too great. A few weeks after his confrontation with Shanice, Jerome held another one of his infamous parties. This one was even grander than the last, as if he wanted to reassert his dominance and power. The guest list was a veritable who's who of America's elite, Hollywood stars, athletes, politicians, and business magnates. Over 100 people arrived, all dressed in the mandatory white suits that gave the party an eerie, almost cult-like uniformity. The sprawling mansion was illuminated by soft, golden lights, giving the illusion of warmth and elegance. However, Shanice knew better. Beneath the glamour, something darker was always lurking. Despite her unease, Shanice attended the event. She had no choice. Jerome's reputation was everything, and her absence would spark questions that neither of them wanted to answer. Still shaken by the events involving Ryan, she hoped her husband would keep his promise to stop. She hoped, naively perhaps, that tonight would be different. As the night wore on, the mansion pulsed with the sound of music and conversation. Guests mingled, drinks flowed, and laughter echoed through the halls. Shanice kept to herself, nursing a single glass of wine, her nerves on edge. She felt like a prisoner in her own home, surrounded by people she had once admired but now viewed with suspicion. Every smile, every polite conversation, seemed to hide something sinister. Her gaze kept flickering toward Jerome, who moved effortlessly through the crowd, charming his guests with ease. As the evening progressed, Shanice began to feel a strange sense of disorientation. At first, it was subtle, a slight dizziness, a fogginess creeping into her mind. She set her drink down, frowning, but the sensation only intensified. Her heart raced as she realized what was happening. It was a feeling she recognized all too well, the same drugged haze she had seen in the faces of Jerome's victims. Panic surged through her as her limbs grew heavy, her vision blurring at the edges. Jerome, ever watchful, noticed her discomfort. He approached her with the same calculated calm he always used, placing a hand on her shoulder as if offering support. His voice was soft, almost tender, as he leaned in and whispered that she looked tired, that perhaps she should rest. Too weak to protest, Shanice allowed him to guide her through the crowd. Her mind screamed for her to stop, to resist, but her body no longer responded. She was trapped, helpless, as Jerome led her down a series of hallways to a private room deep within the mansion. The room was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of expensive cologne and cigars. Shanice's eyes, though hazy, could make out the shapes of several men, 10 in total. She didn't recognize their faces, but she knew who they were. They were powerful, wealthy elites, men who thrived in the shadows of high society. They had attended Jerome's parties before. They knew the rules. Jerome's expression was cold, devoid of the affection he displayed in public. He stepped back, watching as the men approached his wife. Shanice's mind raced, but her body refused to move. The last thing she remembered before the darkness consumed her was the sound of the camera clicking on, capturing every moment. The next morning, Shanice woke in her bedroom, her body aching, her mind clouded with confusion. She felt sore in places she didn't understand, and the events of the previous night were a blur. She sat up slowly, every movement sending waves of pain through her. Panic set in as she tried to piece together what had happened, but her memory refused to cooperate. A few minutes later, Jerome entered the room, his demeanor calm as ever. He held a laptop in his hands, his expression unreadable. Without a word, he placed the laptop on the bed and pressed play. The screen lit up, and Shanice's blood ran cold as the footage began to play. She saw herself, her body limp and unresponsive, surrounded by the men from the night before. The horror of what had happened washed over her as the truth became undeniable. Her breath caught in her throat as Jerome finally spoke. His voice was low, steady, and chilling. He explained that if she ever threatened him again, if she even thought about going to the police or exposing him, this footage would be released. He would use it to ruin her life, to make her look like a willing participant in his crimes. He would make sure the world believed she had been complicit in the orgies he orchestrated. Her career, her reputation, her life, everything would be destroyed. Shanice's heart pounded in her chest as the gravity of the situation hit her. She had no way out. Jerome had trapped her, using the very thing that had destroyed her as his weapon of control. The man she had once loved had betrayed her in the worst possible way. In a blind panic, Shanice leapt from the bed, her body fueled by pure fear. She had to escape. She couldn't stay in this house, couldn't be near Jerome any longer. She ran through the mansion, her vision blurred with tears, her heart racing. But before she could make it to the front door, Jerome caught up with her. He grabbed her by the hair, yanking her back with brutal force. Shanice screamed, but no one could hear her over the music still playing from the night before. Jerome dragged her back into the house, his face twisted with rage. He threw her to the floor, his fists coming down hard as he beat her into submission. Shanice curled into herself, trying to protect her body from the blows, but Jerome was relentless. When he finally stopped, she lay bruised and broken on the floor, her spirit shattered. For a moment, Shanice thought she would never get up again. But as she lay there, her mind cleared, and a new resolve took hold. She knew what she had to do. She had to survive. For now, she would play the role Jerome expected, obedient, compliant, broken. But inside, she was anything but. She would wait, plan, and find a way to escape. She wouldn't let Jerome destroy her. Not like this. In the days that followed, Shanice pretended to be the dutiful wife. She smiled when necessary, attended public events with Jerome, and played the part he had forced her into. But behind her calm facade, a plan was forming. She would bide her time until the right moment, and when that moment came, she would strike. Jerome, confident that he had broken her, went about his life as usual, never suspecting that Shanice was far from defeated. In the weeks that followed her brutal beating, Shanice became a master of deception. She wore long sleeves and makeup to cover her bruises, smiling for the cameras whenever she and Jerome appeared in public. Her role was clear, to present the image of a loving, obedient wife, completely devoted to her husband. To the outside world, they were the perfect couple, a powerful duo in the music industry. But behind closed doors, Shanice was plotting her escape. Her resolve strengthened each day. The video Jerome had shown her, the footage of the unspeakable things he had orchestrated, haunted her thoughts. She knew that as long as Jerome had that recording, she would never be free. But she also knew that waiting too long to act would only allow him to tighten his control over her. Jerome, ever confident, resumed his busy schedule. His tours took him away from the mansion for days, sometimes weeks at a time. Each time he left, Shanice felt a small glimmer of hope. She used the solitude to plan her next steps carefully, knowing she couldn't afford to make a mistake. She needed a way out, and she needed to expose Jerome's crimes before he realized what she was doing. Shanice began collecting evidence, working meticulously and with great caution. She went through Jerome's emails when he wasn't around, forwarding incriminating messages to a secret account she had set up. She photographed documents, receipts, and anything else that hinted at the illegal activities he was involved in. She also began recording their conversations when he was home, using a small voice recorder hidden in her clothing. Every time Jerome made an offhand comment about his parties or the people he manipulated, she captured it, storing it all as part of her growing collection of proof. Despite her growing file of evidence, Shanice knew she couldn't confront Jerome directly. His network of powerful friends, including politicians and celebrities, could make sure she disappeared without a trace. She needed the authorities on her side, but she couldn't go to them until she was ready. The turning point came during one of Jerome's extended tours. He had been gone for several days, performing across the country, his absence offering Shanice the time she desperately needed. She knew this was her chance. With Jerome away, she packed a small bag, carefully selecting items she would need to survive once she left the mansion for good. She didn't take much, just the essentials, along with the evidence she had been collecting. With her heart racing, Shanice called a taxi and left the mansion, not daring to use her own car for fear that Jerome had it tracked. She directed the driver to a police station on the outskirts of Atlanta, far enough away from the public eye. Once inside, Shanice requested a private meeting with a detective, keeping her voice low and steady as she explained who she was and what she had come to report. The detective listened intently as Shanice recounted her story. She explained the abuse, the manipulation, and the illegal activities that took place at Jerome's parties. She showed them the evidence she had gathered, including text messages and audio recordings that proved Jerome had been drugging his guests and coercing them into doing things they would never have consented to. The detective asked her about the video Jerome had used to blackmail her, but Shanice explained that she didn't have a copy. It was stored on Jerome's personal devices, which she had no access to. The authorities took her claims seriously. Jerome Carter was a powerful man, but they knew that Shanice's evidence was enough to launch a formal investigation. Still, they warned her that this would not be easy. Jerome had deep connections in Atlanta and beyond, and they couldn't predict how his allies might react once the investigation began. They promised to protect her, offering to place her in a secure location where she could remain hidden from the public while they built their case. Shanice agreed, knowing that her safety was their priority, but it didn't make her feel any less anxious. She had been living in fear for so long, and now, even though she had taken the first step toward freedom, she knew the road ahead would be fraught with danger. The police wasted no time. They began quietly gathering additional information, interviewing individuals who had attended Jerome's parties and piecing together the extent of his criminal network. But Shanice understood that this wouldn't be a quick process. Jerome's influence ran deep, and exposing him would require careful planning and legal maneuvering. As Shanice waited in the safe house provided by the authorities, she reflected on how far she had come. The fear that had once consumed her had transformed into a quiet determination. She no longer felt powerless. She had taken back control of her life, piece by piece, and soon the world would know the truth about Jerome. For now, she had to be patient. The investigation would take time, but she knew that the end was in sight. All that remained was the hope that justice would be served, and that Jerome would finally be held accountable for the horrors he had inflicted on so many. The trial of Jerome Carter became a national spectacle, one of the most sensational cases the country had ever seen. Every detail was followed by the press, and the courtroom was packed with reporters, photographers, and spectators eager to witness the downfall of one of the most powerful figures in the entertainment industry. News outlets ran 24-hour coverage, with headlines sensationalizing every aspect of the case. Jerome Carter, the rap icon, was now fighting to protect his image, his fortune, and his freedom. On the first day of the trial, Jerome entered the courthouse flanked by a team of high-powered attorneys, each of them meticulously dressed and radiating confidence. They were some of the best legal minds money could buy, and they had been preparing for months to defend their client. Their strategy was clear from the start: discredit Shanice, undermine her credibility, and shift the narrative. To them, this was not a case of abuse and exploitation. It was the story of a bitter, scorned woman seeking revenge after her marriage had fallen apart. The courtroom was tense as Shanice took the stand. Dressed modestly and with a quiet determination in her eyes, she faced Jerome for the first time since her escape. The air was thick with anticipation as the prosecution began questioning her. Shanice recounted in vivid detail the horrors of her life with Jerome, the manipulation, the fear, the constant control he exerted over her. She spoke of how he had drugged his guests at private parties, leading them into rooms where illegal activities were filmed. She described the fear she felt every day, living in a mansion that had become a prison, her life controlled by Jerome's whims. But it was when Shanice described the night Jerome had betrayed her, drugging her, leading her to a room where she was assaulted by powerful men while he filmed, that the courtroom fell silent. Her voice trembled as she spoke, but she did not falter. She told the court how she had woken up the next morning, confused and in pain, only for Jerome to show her the footage and threaten her with it. She had been trapped in a nightmare, and now she was finally free to tell the world. The media was captivated by Shanice's testimony. The headlines shifted from speculation to empathy, painting her as a survivor of unimaginable cruelty. Her words resonated with many who had been in abusive relationships, and she became a symbol of strength for those who had suffered in silence. But Jerome's defense team was relentless. They knew that Shanice's testimony could sway public opinion, so they set out to dismantle her credibility. During cross-examination, they painted a different picture, one where Shanice had been a willing participant in Jerome's lifestyle. They produced photographs and videos of Shanice at parties, smiling, laughing, and mingling with the very people she now claimed had harmed her. They suggested that Shanice had enjoyed the wealth, the power, and the fame that came with being Jerome's wife, and that her allegations were born out of revenge, not truth. The defense attorneys focused heavily on the fact that Shanice had remained with Jerome for years, even after knowing about his illegal activities. They questioned why she hadn't left earlier if things were as bad as she claimed. They argued that her involvement had been voluntary, that she had turned a blind eye to the dark side of Jerome's world as long as it benefited her. They painted her as a woman who had lived luxuriously off Jerome's success and was now trying to destroy him for financial gain. Jerome's wealth and influence began to sway the case. His lawyers introduced testimonies from friends, employees, and even former guests at his parties who claimed that everything that happened had been consensual. They called into question the legitimacy of the evidence Shanice had provided, arguing that it was incomplete or taken out of context. Every move was calculated to cast doubt on her story. Despite the relentless attacks on her character, Shanice stood tall. She continued to testify with courage, refusing to be silenced. But as the trial wore on, it became clear that the defense was gaining ground. Jerome's legal team was adept at exploiting technicalities, focusing on small inconsistencies in Shanice's story to undermine her credibility. They argued that the recordings Shanice had made of their conversations were illegal, that certain documents she had gathered couldn't be verified, and that key witnesses she had hoped would testify against Jerome had been intimidated or paid off. As the days passed, it became clear that the power of Jerome's wealth and connections was tilting the scales of justice. While Shanice's testimony had moved many, the defense had succeeded in casting enough doubt to weaken the prosecution's case. Public opinion remained divided. Some saw Shanice as a courageous woman who had escaped a monster, while others believed she was simply seeking revenge. In the end, the court ruled in favor of a settlement. Jerome's lawyers managed to avoid a prison sentence for their client by negotiating a deal. Jerome would not face jail time, but he would be required to pay Shanice $30 million in damages for the abuse she had suffered. The decision was a bittersweet victory for Shanice. While she had won a financial settlement, justice had not been fully served. Jerome had escaped the punishment he truly deserved. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read. Shanice sat, expressionless, as the weight of the decision settled over her. She had fought hard, but the system had protected a man with immense power. Still, she knew that this was only the beginning. The truth was out now, and Jerome's reputation had been irreparably damaged. As she left the courthouse, surrounded by reporters and flashing cameras, Shanice knew that she had taken the first step toward rebuilding her life. Jerome's money could never erase the pain he had caused, but it would help her start anew, free from his control. And though he had avoided prison, Shanice knew that the world would never look at him the same way again. The battle had been long and brutal, but she had survived. And that, in itself, was a victory. Jerome Carter may have avoided a prison sentence, but his life was forever changed. His once celebrated career crumbled overnight as the trial exposed the dark truth about the man behind the music. His name, once synonymous with success and power, was now a stain on the entertainment industry. Former friends, business partners, and allies distanced themselves from him. The public, once captivated by his larger-than-life persona, now viewed him with disgust. His fans abandoned him, and no one wanted to be associated with the man whose actions had been laid bare in court. Though Jerome retreated to his mansion, the fortress that had once been a symbol of his wealth and influence now felt empty and desolate. The parties had ended, the guests no longer showed up, and the staff that once catered to every whim had slowly disappeared. Alone in the vast space, Jerome had nothing left but his memories of a life that was gone. The power he had wielded so confidently had vanished, replaced by the silence of isolation. Despite his legal victory, Jerome knew that his reputation was beyond repair, and the entertainment world had moved on without him. For Shanice, the aftermath of the trial was equally overwhelming. Though she had been awarded $30 million in compensation, the emotional toll of the ordeal weighed heavily on her. The abuse, the manipulation, and the trauma she had endured for years left deep scars, and no amount of money could heal them. She realized that her fight wasn't over, the legal battle might have ended, but the journey toward recovery was just beginning. After the trial, Shanice made a decision to leave Atlanta. The city held too many painful memories, too many reminders of the life she had fought to escape. She moved to a quiet, coastal town, far from the media attention and the spotlight that had once dominated her existence. It was in this solitude that she began the long process of healing, taking time to rediscover who she was beyond the shadow of Jerome's control. With the money from the settlement, Shanice knew she had a unique opportunity to make a difference. She used a portion of the funds to start a foundation dedicated to helping victims of abuse, particularly those in the entertainment industry who had felt powerless against powerful figures like Jerome. Her foundation offered legal support, counseling, and resources to those who needed a way out, those who had been silenced by fear and intimidation. Shanice's foundation quickly gained traction as more and more people came forward, inspired by her courage. She became a voice for those who had been forced into silence, advocating for change within an industry that often protected the rich and powerful. Shanice knew firsthand the difficulty of escaping such a situation, and she was determined to help others find the strength to reclaim their lives. But Shanice's journey wasn't just about helping others. She also found solace in returning to her first love, music. After years of being controlled and silenced, she poured her emotions into songwriting, creating an album that chronicled her survival and her path to freedom. The songs were raw, filled with emotion, and spoke directly to the pain and triumph she had experienced. When the album was released, it resonated deeply with listeners, especially women who had been through similar experiences. It became a symbol of empowerment, an anthem for those who had been victimized by powerful men and were seeking to reclaim their voices. The album's success reignited Shanice's career, but this time, she was in control. No longer was she the pop star molded by Jerome's vision. Now, she was an independent artist with a powerful message, and her music reflected that transformation. Fans, old and new, connected with her authenticity, and Shanice's story became one of survival, strength, and hope. As time passed, Shanice found a sense of peace she had never known before. The trauma of her past still lingered, but she no longer allowed it to define her. She had escaped the man who had nearly destroyed her, and in doing so, she had found her purpose, not just in her music, but in the work she did through her foundation. She knew that while justice hadn't been fully served in the legal sense, she had achieved a personal victory by reclaiming her life and her identity. Jerome, meanwhile, faded into obscurity. The world moved on, and he became a pariah, forgotten by the industry that once adored him. His wealth remained, but it was hollow comfort in the face of his complete and utter isolation. The empire he had built on control and manipulation had crumbled, and he was left to face the consequences of his actions alone. In the end, Shanice's story wasn't just about survival. It was about transformation. She had endured unimaginable pain, but she had come out the other side stronger, more determined, and with a new sense of purpose. Her journey had been long and difficult, but it had led her to a place of peace, where she could finally breathe freely and live on her own terms. And with her foundation, her music, and her resilience, Shanice ensured that others would have the chance to do the same.